Hello and welcome to episode 135 of The Imperial Truth. I'm Greg. Joining me tonight is Mr. Howard. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Greg. Thank you very much for inviting me on, and I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, we've had Howard on before for Roundtable, and it's starting to get a bit more involved in Heresy.
To say the least, yeah. It's I'd say I'd fallen pretty hard on that, as myself and a few others in the local group, my friends Stu and Ant, chief among them, who we've all fallen pretty hard on the Heresy thing. I can't say there's a specific reason. We've always been into it and followed it along with all the vintage over the weekenders. It was pretty much the highlight of the premiere event for me of all the wargaming things, and I followed that and the books all the way through. But particularly recently, the gaming side of it, the modelling side of it, has reinvigorated, much like large other parts of the hobby. I've been enjoying that a great deal. So certainly having resources like this have been invaluable.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, before we go anywhere, let's talk Element Games. You can buy all your plastic crack from Element. You can get all your Titanicus, whatever they're going to release next. It'll be something amazing. We'll get House Knight soon. It'll be fine. You can get all your glues, your paints, although bless them, I think everyone's having trouble getting Vallejo in at the moment, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, you can get all loads of stuff from Element. They're fantastic, and usually it will turn up on the Saturday of pre-order if you pre-order, which is worth that. You know, there are some places which might give you an extra couple of % off, but the fact you get it on a Saturday for me more than makes up for it, because you don't have that extra week before you can get to it. Sometimes you know what it's like with work, don't you, Howard? Sometimes you're like, no. It has to be the weekend or it's not happening.
Absolutely, and knowing it's going to be there for that, I think, that dependability, I think, cuts certain people apart. I would also say another major benefit with Element is their recommendation for different sources, different sort of hobby sources, and for sort of creativity and ideas like that. The people they support. I've certainly been a member of their newsletter, and the fact that they're increasing that and listening out for things like that has been very, very useful for inspiration for products you didn't know existed, or even just creative sources you didn't know existed. I find that to be very useful.
I'll also give a shout out to Byron, who's one of the main halves of the original kind of idea behind starting up Element, is also on a podcast called Facehammer. And they normally do a tournament around this time called the Element Games Grand Slam, I think, or EGGS for short. And they do big painting competitions because they're all pretty into their painting. But obviously they can't do it this year, so they're doing, or have been doing, one online. So they've been putting out a lot of interviews, or they're about to. I'm not exactly sure on the timings. But I know they're doing a lot of stuff online for free, putting it out there, keeping the hobby going, which is awesome as well. Always good to see. So, good guys. And, it might not always arrive on the Saturday. But generally for me, I think there's only one that hasn't. So it does make a difference. And then we've also got Geek Shield. We don't like to think about it, but life, particularly in times like now, we're reminded that life can kick you in the arse at any point. And, if you've got insurance, it might just be worth checking with Pete that insurance does exactly what you want it to. And if you haven't got insurance, then he's perfectly placed to help you out. And it's called Geek Shield because it's aimed at geeks. And if you sign up over periods of time, you will get some vouchers for I think he's doing it for whichever shop you want them for, basically now. But that's kind of your little kickback for staying with them for periods of times. But we got the advert later on in the show anyway. So yes, Howard, so talking about you, I met you first at a weekender years ago, and you've always been into the Heresy per se, but playing it was, did you play Betrayal at Calth or Prospero?
I'd say, I was there. It's tempting to say it, isn't it? It's tempting to go with that quote, but I was there when they released it at that game. I think it was Games Day 12, in 2012, where Betrayal was out and Angron was released. Watching grown men run past me at that last of UK Games Days and fall and manage to roll forward and continue running to be first in the queue to pick up Betrayal, and then play. At that time, I was playing very small games with existing models that I already had.
Right. Okay.
We were doing small stuff, but it was talk about few and far between. It was certainly I had never played a Heresy game, and I know there was a Heresy scene before that with people who were really keen on playing that as the historical war game that it was, using the homebrew. I remember, I think it was Bell of Lost Souls at the time had various rules packs, and there was things like that that hadn't caught me in the same way. To see that treatment that Forge World gave that initially caught me like it did so many others. But playing the game in that scene didn't take off. Now, when Betrayal of Chaos came along, certainly, and I really enjoyed the game of that. I enjoyed the board game itself of that. I actually played quite a bit of that. And in fact, several of us are planning on doing those up as where we still have the sets out here.
That'd be cool.
Doing up as standalone board games with the forces accurate for it and just packing them away, not having them part of our larger Legion forces. So, yeah, played it on and off, I would say,
sure.
Bits and pieces, but not in the way that I've been keen to do so, I would say, pretty much this year, I would say. Maybe it was a sort of starting up again a bit in 2019, but largely 2020. And I don't think... I seem to have seen an uptake of that. Now, maybe it's because I'm looking in the right places now and I wasn't before, but I like to think I follow along with a wide range of the different sources that are available that lets you know what's going on in the hobby. I play most of the Games Workshop game systems. So I was listening out what's happening out there. Heresy there seem to be more people interested, more people who are the sort of playing the sort of games I would want to play, and I was witnessing more games taking place, like events happening. I mean, I live in London, seeing events take place here in London, large scale tournaments of 30, 40, 50 people. And they just looked fantastic. And you thought, well, yeah, I want to give this a go. And I love the setting in the same way. Siege of Terror is tempting to make that the cause, but I think there's a number of things coming together at the same time. And it's certainly, I'm loving it right now.
I'm going to jump back a little bit there. I don't know that Bell of Souls, I think they might have just conglomerated the rules that were around. Mm-hmm. So I'm not 100% sure. So, if I'm...
As I said it, I worried that I was misquoting, and there was a rules pack at the time, and I've got a feeling it was someone else.
So I think
something associated, but you're probably right.
So the people who know Laurie Golding, editor of Black Library, he was part of a group. They had a forum called The First Expedition, which was originally called something else, the Great Crusade. Can't remember. Mine's gone blank. But they were playing Heresy games, writing rules for it, and spending way more than any of us spend per model trying to find the one Mark IV Stern Guard chess piece from that set and buying a whole set for that one piece, that kind of thing. So from what I know of the scene and of Bell of Lost Souls, I think Bell of Lost Souls may have posted it for sure, but I think it may have come from them because there's a lot of people in the Heresy now who think they're old timers, but they most of those people were still playing it once the rules were released. There were the proper hipsters before them. There's a few dotted around, but a lot of us came in afterwards. So yeah, just wanted to get that out there. But yeah, awesome. So
you're absolutely right, and I think it's worth acknowledging that, saying that the different iterations that those games have taken on in different times, and I think, and then the way it's presented and the sort of golden, what I would consider to be a golden era. And now that said, I remember asking a question in one of the sort of middling Heresy weekenders to a panel of people saying, well, how do you, I can't remember if it was a Black Library weekender or a Heresy weekender, saying, how do you feel that, do you feel that the 30k setting is overtaking that of 40k? It was a genuine topic at that point. And it's interesting to see that change, wax and wane between the two, and I don't think that's a reasonable thing to say anymore. At the time, it certainly was, where there seemed to be more enthusiasm for that around. Now, I think it's sustainable, to say the least. All the game systems can thrive in the same way. It
was certainly on its upstroke as 40k was on a downstroke. I think there is value in what amazes me sometimes, and some of it's because I've been in, and so you get this assumed knowledge that you think other people know. But the amount of times I've been on places and I'm like, hold on, actually, Forge World doesn't work that way, or the game doesn't work that way because of this. And people go, oh, I don't know anything about that. And you kind of forget sometimes people coming in, they're only getting the information they hear from podcasts or blogs or whatever. And if that information is only coming from sources that joined 8 years ago, then they're not going to have that knowledge from beforehand. So they're relying on other sources. And so whenever we get an opportunity, this is why I try and explain stuff, and this is why I try and be as honest as possible, and we don't get it right all the time. And there's a couple of times here when, I've had Andy Hoare go, Greg, you said on your show this. Well, that's not actually what happened. I think my biggest gripe at the moment is, this wouldn't be a problem if Alan Bligh was alive. And I'm like, hold on, like, Alan Bligh was awesome at what he did. Like, there's no doubt about that. Like, wherever you go, he was awesome at what he did. But Alan Bligh will tell you that he was part of a team. And the way a book's laid out, probably he didn't have a huge amount to do with that. There are people whose jobs it were to lay books out. And we know a few of them. Things like that. So, but they become, the problem is the more they're repeated, the more they become facts. And then that leads to people going, hold on, we were told this. And you're like, you never really were told that. That's just because, this story was talked about and was never stopped. So,
I think it's an interesting point. I agree with you. I feel that's a difficult ground to go on. And I find the increasing, I think it's reasonable to say there's been an increasing maturing of the types of conversation people are having around the hobby. There are more platforms for it now, or maybe I'm just tuning into more platforms of it now, but I think the amount of content creation is considerable, but on whatever channel you might choose to be it YouTube, podcast, Warhammer community, things are being discussed. Even, we were just talking off air about people doing academic papers talking about this sort of thing and the impact it has. I find that certain things then jumping to, well, it wouldn't be like this. If you think that's not a particularly mature, that's probably too strong a word. It's not a particularly helpful line of criticism or discussion. It's reasonable to have criticisms and say, how about it's done like this as an alternative? This is how I would suggest it be done as an alternative. Maybe we look at that. Maybe it's something I might suggest. I find that more useful. First of the whole many of us, anyone who heard someone like Alan speak, okay, that was fantastic. I'm feeling the hairs on the back of your neck go up as he's describing a piece of history or piece of lore that he's written. Fantastic. There will be other people who contributed in the same vein as that. That doesn't take away from that. And to think that something is diminished wholesale and can never be anything else is a shame. I think that's not a helpful piece of constructive criticism. I think that it makes it difficult, but I think there's a lot of other far more positive things being said at the same time.
Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more into that as we move forwards, I think. So, what's been going on with the Heresy since we last recorded? And this episode is a little bit late. For those people who are expecting to get a Saturnine run through, unfortunately, Michael's been busy. Busy on holiday, mainly, isn't he? Disgraceful.
Well, the million word Mike. He's a busy man.
He is a busy man.
He's got a lot of things to do, but I think when we pin him down, he's got a guy to talk to about
and he said, crack on without me, and I was like, no matter how good you and I are, Howard, because Howard's going to come on for that episode as well. No matter how good you and I are, Mike is track of words, and we need him.
The context that Mike can provide, I think, is second to none, really. I feel it would be diminished without him considerably.
So
I might have been pale in comparison.
I had a false kind of emboldening that we were definitely going to get a Saturnine episode out this month. It didn't happen, and therefore everything's been thrown up in the air, and we're recording, and this may even come out later than we're recording now. So, thanks for bearing with us. We'll try and get back on track. But we've had book 9. You haven't had a chance to read yours yet. I haven't really had a chance to read mine yet. That's all right. We'll dive into it next week, I think, into detail. But well received so far, so that's great news. Sold out within like the day in the UK. So the big fear that it will be gone in an hour. I think regularly. I think I've said this about novels as well. I think GW does. Forge World do fairly well with working out, and Black Library working out how many books they need. They seem to be at about the right number. They sell out quick, but not like you don't. After a few weeks of the odd person scrambling around to try and get one, it literally is the odd post here and there. I think if they were way out, there'd be a lot more clamour about people not being able to get it.
I thought obviously there was such a level of anticipation around that book.
Yeah,
I could see why there was nervousness there. Well, there were people thinking, "Oh my goodness, are we gonna be able to get my copy of this? To miss now would be disastrous." But I'm pleased it went as smoothly as it seemed to be.
Yeah, there was one person said it was something along the lines of, "There's a lot of people with some money sitting in their Forge World account ready to buy it," and I'm like, "Yeah, there is," but a random 40k player is probably unlikely to go, "Oh, I've got £110 in my account. Oh, I'll stuff it. I'll buy a big black book for Heresy, which I don't play." I just don't think that happens a huge amount. It's not an impulse purchase. So the people who had the money, who were excited, who were very vocal about being excited, were the people who were going to buy it anyway.
Yeah, so, I agree.
And I think that's sort of proven to be the case, without any actual facts to back that up. It feels like that they've done a good job on that one. If your mail carrier is late with it, unfortunate, but they got it out fairly quickly. Mine was sitting at home waiting on the step, as all good parcel deliveries just leave the £120 whatever it is, £150 package. Just luckily, I live in an area where a big brown box on a doorway is going to stay there most of the day, but it easily could not. But hey ho, I got it home, and got my dice as well. Dice.
Yeah. I was going to say, nice segue. Nice segue. The dice was quite the surprise for me. Yes. I have all this for all things. If it's an accessory or has the word limited on it in some way, I'm going to be the collector among us is going to rear its head.
Sure.
That was when someone in a friend group put that up and said there's 18 sets of dice coming. There was a certain goodness, but I think they did a great job with those. The design of them I thought was very, very good.
Yeah,
so it's interesting seeing how they'd taken. I remember hearing Mark Bedford talk about the design of the dice they released previously, and him saying we've just needed to make it very clear that we put the Legion symbol on the 6. I think it was a cheer went up around the room. And you think, and even this, the colours had changed from some of the previous releases to make them more legible. I was just surprised that they released them, or rather, they announced the release. Was it on the Thursday?
Yeah, it's
that is a sudden release.
It was cool. I think some of the designs have just been tweaked as well. As you say, some of the colours have been changed, which I think was partly to make them more legible. I got the Space Wolves and Word Bearers because the Word Bearers ones work very well for demons. Particularly bearing in mind I've got a Crimson Fury list, so they're perfect for that. Yeah, to see all 18 come out. Essentially, the reason the dice stopped was because I can't remember if the company went bust or they had a problem with the company. Basically, they didn't have a company to make dice anymore. And that's why they stopped the first time round. Now, hello, Magnus. Now I get the feeling, and I don't know, but I get the feeling in trying to sort all that out, they had plenty of other stuff going on. It just got pushed to the wayside. And probably after a certain amount of time, because I think Holly redesigned the dice, it probably turned around and said, well, seeing as we're going to do them, let's make sure they work perfectly. And so that all leads to all the delays. But the big thing is, they're a stock item.
I was going to say this, and I was slightly nervous about saying it because I wasn't certain if they were. I'd heard
they didn't make it clear. They didn't explicitly say it, but they did reply saying that they are a stock item, which is fantastic. So at the gaming club I play at, there must be 3 of us really that play Heresy now. There's about 5 people who've bought dice, and none of those are Heresy players except for me, I don't think, because they've all bought them for their chapters.
Yeah, exactly. It's got a wider appeal and beyond Heresy, but obviously it's leaning towards that.
And at 20 quid a pack.
Yeah, not bad. I mean, I had the slight fear that they would, knowing what the prices might be, that it's usually you think,
so
it's going to be X and then it's X plus 20% or something. But it wasn't the case here. I thought that wasn't bad, really, for what it was, assuming you don't play too many legions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. And I mean, I bought 2 sets of each, and then I suddenly realised actually I like my big bag of random dice, and I want some Space Wolf ones. I've got some World Eater ones in there as well. But
sorry, you've got World Eater
dice because they were
the same bag.
In the same bag. It's going to be messy. That
upsets me, Greg.
Yeah, they were the prettiest dice of all the dice they did with the World Eaters one, so I had to just buy some.
The ones that were a surprise to me was the Night Lords ones.
Yeah.
I saw a photo of those online today. They are surprisingly good.
Yes.
The way the red stands out on those. I agree with you on the World Eaters. Certainly from the photos, they look great. But the Night Lords ones really surprised me how much they look good. It's not ones that I would go for myself, but I thought they looked great.
I'm not the kind of guy who'll buy 60 dice just to use with one army. I'm like, no, I've got a big bag of dice. I've got dice in there from when I played for Team Island in the Six Nations, and then dice off people I've played against at various points. So my it's like a bit of a history of my gaming in a weird way in my dice bag. So I grabbed an extra 20 to throw in there, which is fine by me, which is cool.
I think that's quite a good way of doing it. A friend of mine said something similar as a way of almost putting a limit on us doing something silly and ordering too many dice. He was saying of too many of one type in particular. He said there is a certain something about when you've got to roll, that 40 bolter shots, and you roll 20 of them, and then you roll them again.
Yeah.
There's a certain gamesmanship you can play there.
I mean, I don't know how many dice I got in there, but it's plenty. But it's things like when I pick out my USA dice for like a priority phase in Age of Sigmar or something else, and I'm picking out my USA dice, and it doesn't roll any more 6s than any other dice. But when it does, I get to shout USA, USA, and it's kind of developed its own mystique in the gaming club when I pull that dice out. That kind of thing. It's all those little things. But yeah, 18 legions, 18 dice sets. Fantastic. Will they do the other ones? I'm not sure they will, because these appeal to all the chapter players as well. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll throw out some Mechanicum and some whatever down the line. But it's good to see them for sale.
Feasible that they might do out some of those, but I would imagine those would be a much more limited run, or like seen elsewhere. So we can see that being Mechanicum, maybe Auxilia. I could see it maybe, but it's going to be
outside of Mechanicum, which could also be Adeptus Mechanicus and maybe Custodes. Like, how much crossover are you going to get? Demons, I suppose. So and there's we can't be stupid. Like, if they're going to make something like this and they can sell it to 40k players, that means we're much more likely to get it.
But I think that might work the other way as well, where you think Custodes have had a recent set of dice done as part of when the library had their event. They had a set of dice when the Custodes Codex came out for 40k. Previous time around to that, I can imagine there's enough communication. Maybe I'm overestimating here, but I would assume certainly now that there's a level of communication that might say, hey, we're not going to produce a rival product on that round. So I could see Mechanicum, Custodes, chief among them, being ones where perhaps they don't do it because they'd be worried that they'd have multiple products. But not factoring people who want everything. This
release almost more than so I've seen some interesting discussions recently, and people still saying that Horus Heresy's like the forgotten child and all this, and I'm like, actually, well, if you took COVID out of it, we've had regular releases, and some people don't agree with that. I don't think I can say any more to that. I think if you went back and actually plotted out the releases, the last year essentially has been steady, and that's the release schedule we're on. I think that's a planned steadiness. Things like the dice are sometimes the thing that makes you think, yeah, we're doing fine, because they made dice for Heresy. Like, that's not something you do when you're just trying to take the last dregs of whatever of the game out of it. So I think it's just a healthy sign that we've got the dice as well. But we also got the lion. Have you seen? Is it Borgia's? Who did that? No, it was Giuseppe, was it, who got one? I was trying to remember who posted their lion. It was one of the Forge World painters. Might be one of the ex-Forge World painters. But it was a beautiful...
I saw a few people this weekend. I think I might even have been as soon as Friday, unboxing and starting to get ready for this. I haven't seen a painted one yet.
Oh yeah, this was out.
And just going back and talking about the point of reveal rather. It's a stunning piece.
Yeah, it's Borja Garcia, the Forge World Lion. He's the one he's done as a personal project. It's on Instagram.
I might have seen this. I think I know the one you're talking about.
You can find, so it's B Garcia Phoenix on, so BGarciaFenix on Instagram. It's just fantastic because it's the first different one we've seen. What a model! I think he's fantastic. I think he's brilliant. Sam's knocked it out of the park with him. He's up there as one of my favourite models for the Primarchs.
I agree with you, and I was trying to put my finger on why that was. It's something about the stature. The war gear is excellent, but there's something about the stature. I love the range of weapon options, which is a conversation people have been having about the Heresy for some time, or for Primarchs in particular for a while. But I think the stature just sort of captured it particularly well, I thought.
So I just think it works. I don't think I can say it any much more than that. You're right. The pose for the lion is great. Don't get me wrong. The pose for Dawn was perfect for Dawn, but I always think you get a little bit more when there's some movement in a piece. And that's not. I really like the fact that Dawn isn't moving because that does tell his story. But I think it makes it easier to like a piece that's moving. But it just seems to work on every level. So I still probably think Ferrus Manus is my favourite. But it just, everything fits right with the lion.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something about it that just captures that while being the right level of stoic. There's something about it. And equally, the level of detail is quite remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. And
I mean, they often are the case, but I mean, it's just nice to see it again.
I just think Sam got, maybe it's the balance of the model in terms of he's got the right amount of stuff on him and his pose is right. And to be fair, I think Forge World have helped with this in terms of allowing multiple weapon options, because if you do him with his sword, his scabbard's empty.
That presumably
separate piece, I think.
That presumably came from the model first, using the typical
rules.
You think? You think the rules came? I think the rules.
I don't know.
Model.
I'm not sure. I don't know at the end of the day, and it's a shame that we can't, get to Sam to ask him, because it's not the kind of thing I'll message him on in the internet to find out.
No.
But maybe it worked for Sanguinius. We did I wonder with Sanguinius whether they had to do the two, that was a rules thing, and then maybe it is that actually we can sell two weapon options and people are fine with it, because when he wants
basing this on what I've heard other open days or events, or even just talking to designers and others where they say that the models tend to come first.
Okay.
Now I wonder if that's evolved somewhat, and particularly on something like a Primarch, there's so much described on those. It's a slightly different animal.
With GW generally, models come first. That is a kind of an underlying thing. The Primarch's rules, when they sat down and wrote the Heresy, they were working on Black Book 1. One of the first things they did was go through all the Primarchs and work out their rules. And Alan said this back on Weekender 1. It was, all the Primarchs rules have been written. Now, whether those rules stayed the same, because again, this is something that's happened a lot actually recently online as well. People are quoting stuff from 5 years ago as definitive, and it's hold on, I know of occasions where Tony Cottrell stood up and said something, and all of his staff are that's not true and can't happen. It was wrong from the moment he left his mouth, and that wasn't intentional. That was Tony's we could do this, and then someone who's in that department's going, that's physically not possible.
We've all we've all worked. I mean, we all know what projects are like. We're like, we're definitely never going to do this. And
you need to be in this town at 9:30 and this town at 10:30. I'm like, that's not going to happen. Yeah.
Exactly. Loads for people to say.
So you need.
I remember the point you're making, and I would always taken it. And I mean, this is the fallacy of people's memory. You think I remembered that being as they'd identified the character or the direction they wanted to take. So they identified who were going to be more support characters, who were going to be direct combat fighters, who were going to be strategists. I hadn't realised they'd gone as far as...
I'm fairly sure, I'd put a pound on it, that they'd worked out all the rules.
Fair enough.
I could be wrong.
No, I think it's whatever.
And even more reasonably, that could have changed.
Yeah.
But so Sam wanted to put Dawn into 2 poses when he made him. His idea was to have the model we've got now, but then to swap the hands up or arms, lower arms up, to have him swinging, and that didn't get approval. And that might have been 1 weapon though, not 2 weapons. So it's something they talked about, and helmets have been talked about a lot previously as well. So something somewhere happened for them to say, yeah, cool, actually we can add, a weapon option in a helmet, and that's fine. And it might even come from something as far back as having Russ and his walls and seeing the fact that a lot of people bought Russ and his walls and not just Russ. It could be something like that. We don't know. But the line's fantastic. I actually think the whole Dark Angels line is one of the best as a complete line. I think it's stunning.
I was saying something similar to a friend who's just started Dark Angels, and thinking of that, particularly I thought the Terminators were stunning as a Legion Terminator, Legion specific Terminator set. I thought they were very, very impressive, and it's tempting to think that as the technology of design has moved forward, the language of design, the confidence that they've developed with the design process has improved. You tempted to go along with that, or perhaps they just get certain inspirations work well for certain legions. But I thought they absolutely smashed it with those. I thought they did a fantastic design for that Terminator unit particularly. I think they had a real strong image, which is then reflected. Which I can't wait to read the background in the book, the Legion organization. I think it's going to be fantastic. I thought. Yeah, I just think they got it right across there. I thought, just thinking about the line for a second, I was surprised that they put the iconography on the unit, on the Marines on the base. They got them as Night Lords.
Yeah.
And whereas I don't think any of the others with the scenic bases have got Legion specific, let's say, casualties, victims, whatever.
I can't remember on Russ's.
I don't think they are. You think the guy that Alfarius is running through? I don't think he is. There's helmets and bits of armor and things. People use them in conversions a lot, don't they? Where got people who got like Khan running through a couple of guys, and they can be painted as whatever. This was the first time I'd see them be Legion specific. They are specifically Night Lords, where they got the iconography modelled on. I was surprised they did that. I can see why, but over something that is fair. It's not integral, is it? Because it's not the gaming base, but it's. I thought it was an unusual decision.
Yeah, it is what it is. Maybe they didn't have to do it. They could have left that.
It's not a negative.
I'll tell you what, though, that base. Have you seen the sprues? Have you seen the sprue of it? The models on the gates.
No, I've not.
So there's the half chopped open helmet with the brain inside.
Oh yes, I did. I saw that in the preview.
Fantastic.
I was itching to see it from another angle because it looked like there's been a casting error or something, but it was clearly deliberate. But I looked at it and thought for a second, oh no, what's this? What's been captured in the image? But I was itching to see it from another angle. I can't wait. I
don't know who sculpted the base because it's not always Sam that does the base. In fact, I think regularly it's not.
I think for some years they've divided up the job amongst a few sculptors. Sanguinius was at least 3 people involved on that. Amazingly, partly. I spoke to Simon at length about that, and he was extremely excited to do that model. But he did say, because I hadn't realised his background was it was in the design. Well, it was in the sculpting of animals in particular and anthropomorphic things. So he was itching to go forward and do sanguineous. He was talking about it in one of the sessions about sanguineous, like almost coming in with like an attack pose, like an eagle or something like that. Something really aggressive and hyper. Really emphasizing the movement in a really hyper realistic way. I thought this is going to be spectacular. But there were certain practical problems with it. Wasn't practical for Simon to be tied up for that long, sculpting that many feathers. They said there was just too much benefit in doing that in CAD to make it any other.
So, yeah, the Forge World Greater Demons, the original ones.
Yeah.
The big. Trying to think now. Who was it? Which one did he do? So basically, the guy who made them left Forge World and joined Weta Workshops, and he hadn't done the Lord of Change at that time. And I was at an event. He's like, "Yeah, I'm off to Weta," and I was like, "What about the Lord of Change? You haven't done the Lord of Change." And his reply was just like, "All those feathers." And so he couldn't bring himself to start it, and he did do it whilst he worked for Weta. And he also worked for Mercer Miniatures on their Chimera, which is still one of my favourite models ever made. He was fantastic. But yeah, it was the thought of doing all those feathers by hand. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, why do that when you can do it on CAD and get almost the same effect, if not the same effect? Yeah.
If you've got a team that can work together that well, you'd be insane not to do it. If it has to stick with some previous method of doing things, actually would be ludicrous.
Particularly bearing in mind that, as far as I'm aware, the only other person to do Primarchs was Rob McFarlane. So, like, Sam's done almost pretty much all but one Primarch, as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong.
I have a suspicion that Israel did Perturabo.
Oh, you might be right.
I think I've got.
So Rob McFarlane did Alfarius. And maybe Israel. Okay, yeah, you might be right. So
I'm not. Yeah, I'm
even
not
if he did,
right,
sure Sam's done. Even if he did, Sam's done the rest. Yeah, having him where he could be working on the Lion and Khan. Why waste his time? Essentially, waste his time making feathers when that is something that can be handled that way. I like that.
Yeah, I think the Lion is great, and I think I can't wait to paint it or build it and paint it. I think people are going to be, and it was interesting to see his rules creeping out as well. People previewing those even before release. He seems to be an absolute monster.
Yep, absolutely. Right, one thing before there's a couple more little bits. The return of items to sale on Forge World's website.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So you saw this, like the Aurochs is back in. So Forge World are working, like all of us, in restricted conditions. Unfortunately, Forge World's kind of department where they do that is not the best designed to cope with that. And making resin models is a bit more involved than making plastic injected models, or whatever it's called. Where you have the big machines and whatever, you've got to take these out of molds and everything else. That means they're struggling to keep up with demand, as we can see, because lots of stuff's gone off sale, immediately calling for the end of the world and all the usual stuff. But the Aurochs has come back up, and a few other items have come back on sale. It's worth having a little check. If you want something and you haven't seen it, it's worth just having a little check every now and then, because these do pop up. Some people are quite good at posting about them in the various groups, which helps. But
do you think that could be that to me is an area? I think all your points are valid there, but I think there's an area, and this is something we've discussed at length over probably GW in general. Their communication is unrecognisable from where it was several years ago. There's still areas where I feel they've got the people who could do a good job at communicating that sort of thing more effectively, and for whatever reason, it doesn't ever seem to quite connect.
Do you know?
The Hammer community could do a great job at communicating that sort of stuff and say, "Hey, this is gone, but we're hoping to get it back. Maybe that level of uncertainty in communication they wouldn't be too comfortable with. Kind of fair enough. But
all they need to do
communicate this better.
So on the Forge World's website, like something's not for sale. It's not temporarily like okay, they've got temporarily out of stock and stuff like that. But every now and then they're just like not available, or they're just some of the tags they use are completely wrong for what they need. They could do with a more clearly defined set of temporarily unavailable, no longer made, or whatever you want. They could clean that up a little bit. Yeah. Unfortunately, there probably is still a grey area when actually this mould's gone and we really need to remake the mould, but actually we've got this and this to do first, so it's not going to be for a while. But then they could they could tell us that. Like, why not tell us, sorry, the mould's gone wrong. We don't have a time scale, but as soon as we can get around to like doing it and fitting it in with what we're doing, we will do it. This could take a while.
I agree with you. I think that's the sort of thing. I don't feel that is privileged information. I don't feel that information that we as a community would misuse or misunderstand, or would be too complex to understand. That is a message that was communicated at various open days. We can't have open days in that form at the moment. Okay, fine. But there are other ways of getting it. If it was okay to share that information in an open day or in a session, I would have thought you could share that information in some form in another way. And
they could also
be more calm about this sort of thing.
It might not bother most people. They could even have a link on that site which just explains the difference in making models between Forge World and GW, right? And the fact that you can't just pump out Forge World models the same rate you can pump out plastic models, because there's a lack of understanding sometimes. In fact, I saw this in an Aeronautica thing. It was like, why are the Valkyries or the whatever's just come out? No, the Lightnings.
The resin one. The gunships.
Vulture gunships, that's the one. Sorry, my mind went blank. Why are they in resin? And it's like, well, lots of reasons. Maybe they don't think they'll sell as many as they will of the other things. And this person was like, oh, they definitely will. And it's like, well, I mean, that's your opinion, man.
Yeah, you can have any business owner would love to have that kind of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely will. Okay, well, it's a certain bet then, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, because when you play Aeronautica, it confused me a little bit. I'm like, when I play Aeronautica, I don't sit there and think, oh, there's 40k ships that I can already use, like which are common on the table. No, I think Thunderbolts, Lightnings, Marauders that you don't see. But anyway, either way, whatever. It might just be that they've. Like, essentially, they've got a lot more of their machines up and working now. But one of the things about making plastic models is, like, there's a certain amount of time that it takes to make them. And that's very quick. But then they have to cool down a bit as well. And so they can only ever put X amount of plastic models through that one machine in a day. There's a time limit. And you times that by however many machines they've got. You look at how many models they're producing. I mean, they run out of plastic stuff at the moment. Like, trying to get an Impulsor Space Marine tank was a nightmare. Yeah,
I'm amazed that that's a problem. And you think,
I've got one on order. It's coming.
I hate you.
They're in stock at Element.
It's amazing, isn't it? How that scarcity that's come about, partly because of people demanding things because they're doing more hobby, presumably. But
a bit of that.
Popularity. I mean, we were talking about this Bloomberg article that's come out. The popularity has exploded.
Yeah.
Today, it was announced we're going to have this Forge World book or rather this compendium that's going to have all the rules for Forge World models in 40k. What's that going to do to the popularity of things as they suddenly become usable in 40k, in a resurgent 40k again?
That's it.
The demand is going to go through the roof, and you think it's been hard enough for them to expand their capacity, their production capacity. The city of Nottingham was having difficulty giving them permission to tap into the utility powers that they needed, power, etc., to be able to even expand their facility. It was that level of demand that they were having a problem with.
They've grown
the land. It was phenomenal.
They've grown a significant amount in a short period of time, and they've got a huge range. Like the amount of SKUs that they have. So not only are you dealing with like more hobbyists demanding more, but you're also dealing with a huge number of SKUs. So at some point, you got to say, actually, we can't make any more plastic. Like we've planned for what we can make, and if you then want to make a Vulture gunship, we can't fit that in our schedule because, okay, cool, we made a load of Vulture gunships. We could have been making impulsors in that period of time. So maybe that one just got shifted to resin purely because it had to be in resin, or we weren't going to get it. So there are multiple features to think about with that, and again, not everyone's fully aware of that. And it's like, kind of every now and then, I'm like, actually, there are other reasons behind why they do this. I think we'll get onto that a little bit later as well.
I think you're right though. There's reasons, and one can speculate on the reasons and whys and wherefores for endlessly. But I think it's still true. The reaction or the bad blood comes from, this has gone without notice. Well, they have been quite good on some things, but I agree, removing something. I've seen several people comment on various different platforms saying I was about to buy this Land Raider or something and it doesn't exist anymore. Well, sure you were. You didn't. But whatever. It is still frustrating when something that you're assuming is going to be there, and whatever problem you might have with that separately is another thing. But I do think communication generally would help a lot of those issues. I think it would help avoid those issues. Help avoid that bad feeling. Whether or not that's worth it, another discussion, but I think that would be a relatively easy thing to do given their proven capabilities elsewhere in the business to be able to communicate effectively with their audience. And I think you'd just be able to say, even as straightforward as the mold's broken or we haven't got the resource to put that in place yet, we'll try and get to it, no promises. I think that would do a lot of things. It would take the sting out of it. But seeing that almost that panic-like reaction from people when it's part of a collection or otherwise or something they were planning to get.
Yeah.
I must now have this. I'm going straight to eBay or whatever and paying ludicrous prices for things. You think that could be avoided, and that sort of that loss of excitement of a product could be avoided with better communication.
And it also explains things like, there was a YouTube video I saw, I won't mention the channel, that basically was bemoaning the fact you can't get Forge World even delivered to Games Workshop. It's not on sale in Games Workshop. And there's an element of, if it was, maybe the Heresy would grow, things like that. It's like, well, Forge World can't do that because they would sell too much and they wouldn't be able to keep up. And they're struggling as it is. But there is still a big gulf between, or there is still a gulf certainly between making something in resin, making it in plastic. So, like, they're in this kind of area where they don't want to push too much out, but they still want to sell lots of models. But there's a balance in that, and part of that is, if you don't put it into, on top of the fact that you don't want 7-year-old kid walking in there going, yep, I definitely want a resin model, which I'm going to have to file and bend. And, yes, mummy, I need a heat bed. And and all those other issues you get with it as well. So there's multiple issues there as well. So, and some of that's just, we'll talk about it every now and then. And hopefully a few more people get an idea. And even if my facts aren't quite right, which they're probably not, there's just a bit of a, take a step back. There's probably a reason for this. There's usually a reason. But that's cool. Fury of Magnus is out this month, finally. Yes. Might even be out by the time this is released, depending on how I do this episode. Moving forwards in the Siege of Terror. I'm sure it'll be a lot of gnashing of teeth and all the usual outcry on that morning, but I'll be there in the queue like a mug. Getting my limited edition copy. It has to be done. But we also did get the announcement, a kind of semi-cryptic announcement. They pretty much said it. The next Primarch's novel is going to be the Alpha Legion.
That wasn't as cryptic as I expected it to
be.
No,
I heard people saying, "Is it going to be Alpha?" So I'm like, they pretty much said it's Alpha Legion. So
he did everything but mention it by name.
Yeah, so that's really cool.
I thought it's a really interesting choice. That's not a choice, but that is the one, and probably the one I'm looking forward to the most, despite it not being a Legion I play or otherwise. But I think having that particular Primarch explored, I think it's going to be fascinating, given the tone of all the previous books.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see which direction they go. there's only 5 left, so it's 20% chance it was going to be them, I suppose. But yeah, it will be really interesting to see where they take that.
It's a real subject to get involved with. I mean, that's a daunting novel to write, a novella rather. That's going to be to take that on. The speculation has clearly begun over who's written it.
Yeah, I almost dread to see the name of who's written it, because I could just imagine what a lot of comments are going to be, depending on who. Oh no, they're not writing. They never write my Primarch properly. That kind of thing will always happen. Whoever's chosen to write it, but it'll be really interesting to see just. Alpha Legion are really hard to get the level right of information.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you don't want too much.
It's such a tricky. Exactly, you don't want too much, but you don't want it to be frustrating. It's a real tricky subject to get to take on. So it's going to be a fascinating read. I think that one. What do you reckon, John? John French?
John was a potential. Yeah, I don't know what else he's got in line. I'm not sure, but yeah, John was a thought. And he would be a name that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily like, because apparently he writes the Alpha Legion too powerful or not powerful enough or whichever. So
I haven't heard that critique of him. I thought he'd done a great job, but okay.
Yeah. So Praetorian of Dawn gets grief from both sides of the coin that their Legion is screwed over by John, which I kind of think, if both legions are screwed over, then you've probably got it about right. Because I don't think that can happen. But some people aren't fans of his writing Alpha Legion, I think. But hey, it is what it is. At the end of the day, you don't have any choice over who write the books.
No.
There are books in that series that I like less than others. Simple as that.
Exactly. There are those authors with a style or a particular affinity to a way of writing that resonates more with individuals. I would have thought John's style would, particularly his sort of quite cryptic way of writing things. That's not the right word. His way of creating quite complex stories. I'm thinking of his Thousand Zariman series in particular. There was a complexity to that I thought, and an intensity to it, I would argue, that I would have thought would lend itself really well to that particular Primarch.
Yeah.
Either way, looking forward to it. I think it's going to be good.
Yeah. And on top of that, also, we've had the next, I can't remember what the character series novel announced, which is Corswain. Which could be...
Wow, okay, you've blindsided me there. I thought it was Luther.
Oh, sorry, Luther. Sorry, I've got Corswain on the brain. It's Luther. I've seen so much talk about Corswain today. I've seen so much talk about Corswain today from Book 9. It's Luther. You are correct. It is Luther, which is a really interesting one, because it's an interesting character within the Heresy, because although he's obviously very important and Caliban has its issues in the Heresy, it's very much resolved post-Heresy. So it'll be interesting to see what we get about Luther. And maybe it opens up a little bit more of his thinking while he was on Caliban. Who knows? But that looks like it could be good as well.
Yeah, I think it will shine a light on a topic that hasn't been explored a great deal. There have been books. There's been books, obviously, where it's a subject running through it. But I feel like it's something that could be very specific. I think we've only had short stories really that deal with him specifically, but certainly from his perspective.
Yes,
not his perspective. But I'm just thinking of how spectacular I personally thought Valdor was. I think it's a really good. It's a good format for exploring that type of character. Someone who's sort of adjacent to the main thrust of the story, but still critical in some, or still important, I should say, in some significant way. I think that could be an interesting topic. Trying to think of who else it might have been is difficult. About the only other person who you could imagine one of those books being about would be someone like Malcador, who feels too significant. Trying to think of other characters who would fall into that role.
No, I think there are plenty, to be fair. I think because we've seen with Valdor, we can, like, the space of time, if you look at the Primarch's novels as well, which is kind of in a little echo of what these books are, we've seen Curzes be post-heresy. So it could be a post-heresy Luther story. We've seen Valdor go Great Crusade. So actually, whoever they choose to write about can be written in a fair time scale there. So we could have, trying to think, you could have Sevatar, like, before Thramas.
That's true. I mean, I was sort of wrongly assuming here that the subjects of that series would be non-Astartes characters. Now, that's a bit of a stretch with Luther. But yes, if you include marine characters, then there's a wide scope of who there could be.
I think Malcador's. So for everything we know about Malcador, particularly post Saturnine, you're getting dangerously close to how do you write the Emperor with Malcador, because the more you touch on him, the more you almost have to touch on the Emperor. But if you do a shorter form story about him, then actually you can fit in a nice piece and not have to. It can be set away from certain things. You can avoid some of the issues you might otherwise get. So I think a Malcador story could really work, actually. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see who else, like, named wise. I mean, they could be really brave. I don't think they would, but you could get something like Kelbor Hal, Forge Master General.
The Mechanicum characters in particular are
interesting.
You think Mars is perhaps partly because we haven't got there with the Black Book yet, but it feels that there's extra distance you could go from that.
How about Lotara Sarin?
Oh, a fan favourite.
Like maybe Sarin. Like her first, kind of command of the ship with the World Eaters or something like that would be amazing. Who knows? I mean,
one of the speculations crossed my mind when they were describing who this character would be when they tried to describe cryptically who Luther was, the Luther book was going to be about.
Yeah.
I wondered about, I forget her name now, it's effectively the woman who raised Guilliman.
Yeah. I can't remember her name either.
Yeah, it's a niche one. It's great when you bring up someone who can't remember the reference.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to see how
someone who was described as where all my brothers didn't have a mother figure, Guilliman did.
Yeah,
you think that's a very interesting line. But then, what impact is that going to have on there? One thing I do think is significant about that series as a series is I think that's an indication of the sort of thing, if not the thing, we might see once Siege of Terror is finished.
Oh, big time. Yeah, absolutely. This is a way for them to tell stories that they want to tell in this setting moving forwards.
Correct.
And these are
a continuing narrative.
Yeah, and these are the character series, so these will focus on characters, and they can focus on any character they want. At the end, they can pull out those little one-liners that happen. I mean, it'd be interesting to see where they go with that. How far into the future they go with that, because you could even get some scouring stories in there depending on if they want to leave the scouring for something else and what have you, but they can literally go, oh, this bloke appeared in that book and everyone seemed to like him for that one point, so yeah, cool. Camber Diaz, like there's a guy we don't read a huge amount about, but every time he appears he seems pretty baller, so so stuff like that. There's a lot of scope. I would then like to see moving forwards them to do this almost with, I don't know what their title, I don't know if you'd collect it in that way, but I was talking to a Black Library author who was like, I'd really like to write this story, and it was about guardsmen, effectively, on, slightly away from the main thrust of the war. And I was like, that's a really cool idea, and in the future I hope you get to write that story, because it's, it does fill in parts of the Heresy, but it's not centered around a character that we know or anything like that, but that doesn't make it any less valuable.
Yeah, agreed. And it's encouraging. That's not right. That's condescending. It's reassuring to think that there can be things that will continue to add to the overall picture once the main thrust of the narrative has come to a conclusion.
Absolutely. Should we take a very quick break here, and then we'll come back, and there's a couple more bits I want to chat about.
Sounds good.
What's a Geek Shield? Is it like a Breacher Shield?
Not exactly. Geek Shield is an insurance service giving you hobby rewards along the way. We appreciate that life insurance is a bore, so we wanted to make things a little more exciting with rewards that matter to you. Cool, right?
Okay, so why life insurance? I have feel no pain. Isn't that enough?
Very different thing. Life insurance can be used to settle off your mortgage, help with raising your children, or cover your funeral costs. It's never going to save you, but it will save your loved ones from financial disaster. Here's what some of our customers have to say.
Pete really will give his all to try and find a better policy for cheaper and give you vouchers. Why would you not do it?
It's great to know I have security for my family. Of that, I am certain.
Thanks to Geek Shield, my wife now questions if I'm still worth more alive.
Thanks to Geek Shield, I get to murder my family in the name of the dark gods and get all the money.
Yeah. So head over to geekshield.co.uk to book your free consultation today. Terms and conditions apply. Geek Shield is not a physical shield, nor will it save you from the Primordial Annihilator.
So right back when we opened this this show, you were talking about the fact that although you had been Heresy curious and into the lore and everything else and appreciative of the models and all that, you hadn't really picked up the game and played. And for some reason, you and a handful of your friends have all kind of got into the Heresy over the last however many months?
Yeah, maybe it's a coincidence, but I would say it's sort of beginning of this year, really. Now, obviously, that world events lead to a certain amount of extra hobby time or extra hobby focus, or perhaps just pent up desire to just get out and do something. But it felt like it had been coming for some time, that there was a sort of renewed vigor in it, and something that you think, yeah, actually, I really want to give this a go. And in terms of actually playing some games with it. Played on and off, but nothing serious, and certainly didn't have any real standing army as such. Had the odd unit here and there, and sort of hopes and plans for the future. But it changed. Beginning of this year, where there was a concerted effort between me and certainly two others, and I would say there's a larger number of people playing in the area. But there's the three of us in a regular group who have followed Heresy for a long time have now moved to actively collecting. Get armies to play games with, and have played games where possible around it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. First off, what army are you collecting?
But you said that in the singular, Greg.
I was giving you the opportunity there to.
I started playing war games with Blood Angels, therefore that had to be.
Sure.
So Blood Angels I've had models for them for 40k and in various forms since 2nd edition. Those models will now become a Heresy army.
Sure.
In addition to that, I want to have... It was a combination of things. I had them and some Sons of Horus. Those were the two that really caught me. And then I got... Hearing John French read an extract from the Crimson Fist at one of the events made me almost immediately go out and get some breachers that I was going to use as Iron Warriors and Imperial Fists. And it was Saturnine that reading that recently that made me go Imperial Fists. My decision was to create rather than keep adding to one army, which I've done in the past.
Yep.
And say I want multiple of every unit over many, many years and just keep adding to it so I can play any kind of game with any kind of force in the future. Why bother diversifying? I decided to take a very different approach, which is one inspired by Titanicus, actually, was to have much smaller forces of a range of different factions. So it's the 4 factions I've now chosen to play as 2 sets of matched legions so that I can host games for friends and hopefully get them into the game as well. And it's Blood Angels versus Sons of Horus, Imperial Fists versus Iron Warriors. And that has also been somewhat influenced by the articles that have been being put out on Goonhammer, where you put together little starter forces. And I thought that is an ideal way. I don't have to... I can tweak those if I so want, but I just need something to start with. And
There's-
it's
yeah.
as any, and there's a level of thought been put into that I don't necessarily have time to do. I might do once I got in it, got a few games under my belt, and I would want to take it in a certain way.
Yeah, there's a safety belt there, a structure to build to, which means you're not going to be too far from anything you want to, wherever you want to go from there is fine. You're still not in, and you're not going to find out that you've bought all the wrong models and all the other pitfalls that you can have.
Yeah,
with
and
Heresy
somehow you sort of go along and you think, well, you can be overwhelmed by choice almost, because like so many of the games, but I think it's perhaps even more true of 30k, they're, particularly if you're in playing that more narrative style, but whatever rule of cool tends to win, you can't really go wrong, but you need some direction. Otherwise, where do you start?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the core from which you deviate? There's some cool units, but you don't want to be just running the super elite this, that, and the other, and that's all you run. You know, actually, I want to run. I mean, some of the most entertaining games we had recently were super small, super basic games where we're only going to run a couple of tactical squads each and a Centurion, a basic Centurion, and just run those. And while that sounds boring, when you're getting into it, it was really entertaining because they started building up their own character. They were incredibly vanilla, but we really enjoyed those as a way to get into really understanding what the basics of the rules were, creating your own stories around those characters, and then embellishing them and building them up from there was a great way of starting out.
That's cool. So what's really interesting actually was weird, probably about the same time, for 3/4 of a year, maybe a little bit more, I had the feeling that there was a bit of a not necessarily a renaissance, although maybe now I feel that may be becoming more of a thing. But certainly there was a growing kind of a swell of people being interested in the Heresy, where for the previous year or two, maybe that wasn't the case. And I was looking at various things like the releases, maybe helping in that. Maybe some people who tried 8th and then decided they didn't like it. Various things. But one thing really struck me, and I think there's some value in it, is over that period of time that you started collecting this hobby, we've seen more regular articles from Games Workshop, from Warhammer community, about the Horus Heresy. And I've seen people coming onto various chat groups, forums, Facebook, asking about Heresy. And I felt that there was this kind of growing kind of interest in getting the game out. And various places I've kind of seen people saying the opposite, and I'm like, I don't know. It just feels like it's not there. It's not like when they dropped Betrayal at Calth and there was an explosion. But there is a growth in that. Do you think any of those articles?
I think they contribute to it, definitely. I mean, there's definitely a presence on there, and it's a presence that is made to be clear that it's a game of significant standing. There was a point, and I touched on it earlier in our discussion, there was a point where I think it was considered the third core game, or was considered on the verge of being the third core game. I don't think any game, I mean, there's an argument to say that something like Blood Bowl should be, but I don't think any game could really be quite at that level of your Age of Sigmars and your 40Ks. But there's definitely been, almost seems to be, a critical mass, and there's a legacy to the Heresy, more than there is in any other game that they put out, that's got such a dedicated fan base, such a dedicated set of source material, such a rich set of source material, that it gives you a critical mass that it doesn't take a great deal, like you say, a few articles here and there, to create quite the buzz around it. I sort of feel that Siege of Terror has had a significant impact, but the way even these sort of splash releases of certain things are put out, Aeronautica is an interesting one, and Titanicus to a greater extent perhaps, where there's a build-up and a focus on something. That continued focus, Necromunda perhaps as well, all of those games where they've got this regular beat to a topic or a set of linked to a set of even relatively small releases, but what does small mean? I think does generate more interest. And once you get a bit of a critical mass where you know that an investment in a game isn't going to be wasted, so i.e., say you move to a new area or you fancy trying a new game, you know that your investment in building an army isn't going to be wasted where you turn up and you go, well, there's no one playing in my area. I'm going to end up selling this in the end. I don't have the motivation to do it. I feel Heresy's moved past that, and there's enough right now of an impetus behind it where it's tempting enough just to put you over the edge, regardless of whether they're starter sets or otherwise, which would make it even easier. I think those articles do contribute to that because they are contributing to knowing that there is that kind of beat or pulse of the game or of the setting enough to draw people in.
Yeah, what you've described there. At one point, Games Workshop just defined Heresy as its third game system, and it's never really been that level, is it? And it never will be. And there's an argument of, can there be 3 games of that size that are kept going by a company? There's a critical mass there in that respect. But you talked about Blood Bowl and Necromunda, and we don't fit into that either, Adeptus Titanicus, mainly because of the way our books are released. So we don't have that, however many months it is, like kind of build up to the next book coming out. We have a 1.5 year long wait, or what have you, and so I think we rely more on releases and articles, and we've never really had the articles. What we have had in the past is releases, and what we had starting from almost a year ago was a steady progress of releases, which is something that we'd been missing for a few years, which all helps visibility, all helps, you say there, knowing that you're going to get a game of it. Well, there's that perception is everything, isn't it? So if Forge World, if you keep seeing Forge World have released a new Heresy toy, well, they must be selling, so people must be playing, so it's a safe game to get into. Like, there's a very simple process there that your brain can do without you really thinking about it. Whereas if you haven't seen a Heresy release for 4 months, you start to go, oh, is that game even going anymore?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That dreaded. Yeah. Exactly that. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. Oh, that's not a good place to be.
No, it's not. And so we've had the Road to Thramas articles that led up to Book 9. How many did we have in the end? It was quite a few, wasn't it? And there were. I think those roads we talked earlier on about 7 of them. There were. We talked earlier on about how they. How there was a fever for this book. And I think in part that was the nature of the fact it had been delayed by COVID. So we've had that extra few months to kind of get it in our hands. But also, I think it's been helped by the Road to Thramas. That people have seen the articles. It's being talked about by people who don't necessarily play 30k as well. And therefore it creates its own momentum.
I was going to say, because I agree with that. I wonder if that's also true of the coverage that they've done across their publications, because I'm also wondering about articles in White Dwarf or similar. Now, the readership of White Dwarf, I assume, I've got to speculate here because we will never know, I assume the readership is not that as large as that of Warhammer Community. What we saw in that Bloomberg article that came out the other day, 8 million subscribers, 8 million visitors.
I think that's more than fair to say, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thing to assume. Therefore, Road to Thramas is reaching a far larger number of people than articles in White Dwarf. I wondered about, I thought it was a really interesting decision that they put 2 character sets of rules. I was going to say data sheets, but not quite. For 2 character rules as downloads in one of their recent articles, the 2 Dark Angel characters that they presumably couldn't fit in the book. Now,
that's an interesting one.
Start releasing little units here and there, because that's something that you won't see with Heresy. Because your point about Heresy rules, Heresy content, the crunchy stuff that people want to get a hold of, only comes far less frequently. You think of something like Necromunda, which is releasing substantial books. Those the gang, the faction books that they're now doing, the House of Chains, House of Blades recently, and House of Iron coming up. They are substantial books with a hell of a lot of lore in them, in addition to very, very detailed rules. Those are coming not quite every quarter, but that was it was predicted to be every quarter.
Yep.
Now, compare that to there's more content in 4 of those, I think, than there would be in a black book. And those are coming as you say, a year and a half or otherwise. So if it did shift or somehow have more frequent releases, the point is the Heresy players are going to be absolutely clamouring for when this incredibly rich source that is a black book comes along. I wonder what it would be like if those Road to Thramas or frequent Heresy articles, be they in White Dwarf or otherwise, started dropping rules. Now, I could imagine people being highly hesitant about that because of balance issues. Well, how does that fit into a thing? But then it worked for the Dark Angels. Okay,
so I just had a little look back before we go anywhere else. It was 7 Road to Thramases. But on top of that, we've had the background to the Thramas Crusade, Horus Heresy faction focus, the Night Lords, Dark Angels, the lore of Caliban. So when you start looking at it like that, there's a bit more content. You're right, they gave us those 2 characters. I do wonder if that's a little bit in response to, there was a bit of an outcry of, there was, over lockdown, there was stuff that came out for Necromunda and Blood Bowl and other bits and pieces on Warhammer Community, and Road to Thramas just stopped, and we just didn't get any articles for a little bit. So, and there was people saying, can't you just write rules? And it's like, well, I mean, if they furlough people, they can't work, and do they have to furlough everyone? Well, that's a different issue. That's business issues and all that. I wonder if there's a little bit of a response to that, but fair play if they did, and that's the reason they did it, to throw Red Loss and the other guy in there. Cool, no problem with that at all. I think that's awesome. Where you talk about having rules released on Warhammer Community, well, every time they release a new tank, they throw the rules at us on Forge World's website. They don't write an article about it.
That's a very good point.
So now they're previewing Forge World releases better as well, and the time's changed till 10 o'clock, which I forgot this Friday, and I was on there at 5 to 9, and refreshing, and I was like, oh yeah, it's changed to 10 o'clock. So we've got a set new time, in theory, of 10 o'clock on a Friday for our Forge World releases. But as you said, they announced the dice a few days beforehand. Well, cool. Let us know. On Friday, we're releasing the whatever tank. Here is its battlefield role, bit of fluff. Here is its, some of its rules. Don't have to give them all, but that little bit of a preview on Warhammer Community, rather than just go and buy your new Horus Heresy tank. I think would be a really good move going forwards, actually, in terms of maintaining this kind of outreach. That, again, as you say, we need a little bit more than the other games that release more regularly.
But you make an interesting point. I had forgotten, of course, that the rules come out, and I was thinking of, you think of like the Arquitor, that can come along as well, the new tanks like that, and the Sabre, stuff like that. They just slotted right in, and then because they can be used by any legion, you do somewhat avoid, sort of avoid some of the balance issues that you might get with some other things, where something comes along, completely upsets it, but is perceived to have been considered in isolation rather than part of a larger internal balance of a book or otherwise. But it's a very good point that you do see that in Heresy, and now perhaps the way it's going to be talked about could change for the better. Yeah, in terms of the balance of the rules, not many of those rules change from when they're released on the website to when they're put in books. There's a lot of them have just been put straight in, so I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think they do roughly get them right, as right as you ever get these things. They're going to miss the odd one. That's fine. That's cool. But it does feel like we've had a bit of a turning of the corner, and I kind of been talking about this a little bit because, again, people have been saying, "Oh, the Heresy slowed down," and I'm like, "Well, hold on, remove COVID," and I don't think it has. We've had more articles on Warhammer Community. Okay, there is
we're not getting the Heresy Weekender, which is where a lot of information was gained before, and we're not getting the open days aren't the same as they used to be. So our old way of getting information now essentially is gone from us. So we have to get it this way. But is it a bad thing that rather than going onto a forum and saying, no, actually, Pendrag's done his write-up, or the Imperial Truth were at the event when we're talking about this, if someone's new to the game, they're going to go, yeah, but who are these guys? Like, why am I going to trust them? But if it's on Warhammer Community and they've gone, okay, we're doing this new unit are going to be the new book. We're not going to tell you too much about them, but these are little bits. And if they get the similar information across that way, then it's in the place where everyone can find it. Everyone can trust it as much as they want to trust Games Workshop. And it's there. And it can be searched up nice and easily, and it's official. And I think there's a big value to that.
I think that I agree completely, and I think that's something they could and hopefully will. And I suspect I hope it's already on their roadmap that they will expand that functionality. Because it's perhaps telling that the references that I mentioned, sort of off the cuff at the beginning of this discussion, were not Warhammer Community. They were third party. They were fan based things, and I saw and contributed to someone asking on. I think it was on Facebook, on one of the Facebook groups. They said, look, I'm new to Heresy. I'm overwhelmed by the number of things that are in front of me. Anyone got any recommendations of where I might start? And I've made some suggestions. Several other people made various website suggestions. None of them were Games Workshop. Now, I've got it in front of me at the moment just to look up the same as you. So look up the number of Heresy articles that appeared on Warhammer Community. They've got an Explore Our Games section. And Heresy doesn't have a section in there, I don't think. You've got 40k, Age of Sigmar, Warcry, Kill Team, Beastgrave, Aeronautica, Necromunda, Blood Bowl. Heresy could have a section in there. Heresy, they could do more of that, where they've got, as you say, talk about starting. And in fact, I think they did do an article very recently about to say, hey, how to prepare for Thramas, building your starter force, etc. And they were suggesting which tactical squads you might build or similar. So fair enough. But a simple place that you trust, and I think that's one of the things that Games Workshop do extremely well, is that slickness. Yeah. It's become a high street name. There's a slickness to it. It's a highly considered machine, far in excess of what others have been able to do as competitors in the field, and their success is evidence of that. That feels like that's something they could do with Heresy, and I hope they do. And I think the road to Thramas has been a good indicator of that. I hope it goes further.
I've just remembered. You can like those articles on Warhammer Community,
and that tells them whether they're going to.
And that tells them that basically that confirms that people enjoy reading them. Go and like them if you've read them. I'm guilty of this. I don't like when I'm on the internet, when I'm on Facebook. I don't hit the like button very often. Same with Twitter and same with Instagram. Wife hates it, but that's just the kind of guy I am. Yeah. So when I'm on these articles, I don't hit like very often. Actually, I'm going to go back and hit a load of likes on a load of those, because if they look at the metrics and they're like, well, we can put up a Horus Heresy article, it gets 1/10 of the likes of a Necromunda article. Well, then you can, it's maybe not right, but you can understand that they might lean towards Necromunda in that respect. So we can help in that respect. So from that's from Games Workshop. But you listening to podcasts, or you're obviously going on Goonhammer. As you say, they're quite a good resource. Are you looking anywhere else where you were getting into the Heresy, or was it those main places?
There's this little podcasts, something Truth. I don't know what it is. It's got I can't
Edge of Empire. You mean? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, podcasts. Yes, they were good in finding ones that have a mindset or an approach that sort of resonates well with you. I think is part of that, and part of the entertaining part of that. YouTube channels, just searching out on there and having discussions in there. Surprisingly, there are various websites that you sort of think that wouldn't be there, but they're even just having a database to be able to search. I found there's a guide to 30k units essentially on 4chan. It's a 4chan run thing, but it's just fine, like a regular website. And you think, yeah, okay, that's quite useful. Kind of to get an insight into it, just to get an overview. I found just getting an overview would prove challenging otherwise. To be able to say, okay, what is the sum total of this? And I said, what is this red book? It's the red book. Okay, what does that entail? And I've got to go and commit to those and buy those before I can see them. And otherwise, to be able to get that overview, because those aren't in the stores, for example, we don't all live next to Warhammer World. Getting the overview was useful. Certainly, yeah. I mean, really, it was Goonhammer first and foremost amongst those, but that 4chan guide was also proved quite useful. But I found YouTube channels and particularly YouTube. I mean, YouTube. To tell you what's inspired with those is painting guides. Painting guides coming out of YouTube, fantastic. Those, particularly those focusing on the legions. I know Little Legend, Miles at Little Legend's done a few of those. Cult of Paint's done a few of those. I think theirs is fantastic. These ones that are giving you guides, and there's huge numbers of them actually when you start looking around for them. Quick start guides on how to paint your legion. Everyone's screaming on Facebook for a yellow recipe for Imperial Fist. Yeah. An incredibly good shout I've done earlier by someone on one of those groups was to just catalogue all the different yellow recipes and give an image of those so you can pick your favourite. It's stuff like that actually suddenly makes it quite appealing to say, actually, I can batch process this. There are friends of mine who are taking on these guys who are starting-ish Heresy with me at the same time, who are taking on projects with techniques that they would never have dreamed of taking on without having it demonstrated or sort of demystified through platforms like YouTube or otherwise. There's friends who are starting a metallic, essentially a coloured metallic Emperor's Children army and a coloured metallic Thousand Sons army at the same time, using an airbrush, which they haven't used previously, as a result of this happening. That's quite an advanced, I would argue, it's quite an advanced set of techniques. It's actually a way of batch painting a large number of models very effectively and very easily once you've had it demystified. The idea, though, of starting out with it, having the confidence to start out with that and commit to that, it requires quite a considerable bit of research.
Yeah.
And we're at this age now where we can get out and reach those.
I think
because there's such rich material out there.
It's easy to forget once you've been, using an airbrush or whatever, like how daunting those first steps can be when you're thinking about purchasing the equipment and then everything else along with that as well. Yeah, you're right. There's a plethora of resources. As you say, it's important to find the ones that resonate with you. Even years ago when I was in America and someone said something about a podcast, I said, sorry, I don't listen to that podcast. And they were like, you what? And I'm like, it's not my thing. Like, that podcast, I don't like this aspect of it. It's cool, whatever. It's fine. It's not my thing. They were like, oh, I'm allowed not to like a podcast? And they literally were kind of like, oh, I thought I had to listen to them all. You find the ones that, some people say you get echo chambery. Meh, whatever. If you're doing a hobby, it's what you want to do. At the end of the day, have fun. You've got to have fun with it. Otherwise, you won't do it anymore. So, go and find those things and know your resources. As you say, you went to 4chan to find something, but you're an intelligent guy. You know what 4chan can be like. When you go to a wiki and you read up about 40k or 30k, just remember that those aren't written by editors at Games Workshop. In fact, I saw Mr. ADB talking about the very fact that sometimes it's hard to write 40k because everyone's read the multitude of wikis which tell you all the facts, but unfortunately you're wrong because that's the way things grow. So be aware of where you're going, and you'll soon find like the places you like. Goonhammer's a very good resource. I have a couple of things when I read there, and I'm like, okay, cool, yeah. I come at things from a different angle from that, and I wouldn't have written that, but they're great. They're really good.
I mean, as you say, when you're searching for these things, I think it's trying to do that with a completely blank set of expectations is tricky because coming from the perspective of someone who's been into the hobby like many of us for many, many years, and I continued in the hobby throughout. I got very close to having the lapse that a lot of people have, or lapse going in a different direction at the time. I remember starting out at university and thinking, well, that's the end of that then. I won't be doing that for anymore. putting the box of paints under the desk and thinking, well, I won't be seeing any of those for the next 5 or 6 years. And then the person moving in next door in the halls of residence walked in. He said, "Oh, you got the new White Dwarf?" Right. He said, "I've just got the new Chaos Codex." And back in we go.
Yeah.
It was, so it's been continuous. So to remember what it's like to start out completely fresh, which I think a lot of people are going to be doing with no concept of a whole range of different aspects of it, is quite difficult to do. So I think there's going to be different resources for different people. Something that tells you exactly how to paint things or how to collect things from beginning to end, whether even what you to expect in terms of what journey, what hobby you're getting into, is a very different kind of resource to something. For example, I knew full well that going on that 4chan guide for, I think it's called 30k Tactics, is a useful database. I don't take it as the be-all and end-all. I'd never use it as a reference over, it just tells me it's just a factual state of units that exist.
Yeah.
That's quite a useful thing to see and get
Absolutely.
an incredibly broad idea of that's a close combat thing.
And you know what? Some people love the content that they put on those kind of places or in Reddit groups or whatever, and that's fine. That's cool. That's the way you enjoy the game. Awesome. Crack on. It's not for me, most of those. So, I'll stay away.
That's fine. But I think something that gives you just an overview like that, I think has an extremely useful thing. Would I take things that I see on sort of wiki equivalents as fact? No. Would I take any of it as fact? No. You can't take it in those terms, but it all sort of it contributes to that. And you can usually tell reading through something that's gonna work for you, whether or not it's gonna be a useful resource, or whether it's something you think, I like the way they're presenting this. I like the way that they are framing this information and writing this information. For me, that happened to be Goonhammer. I thought their articles were extremely well written for that, and I hope we see something similar with Forge. But I think there is an uptick in quality content creation for various different aspects of the hobby. We're in a period where that's more easily accessible and more easily shared than others. I don't know what effect things like social groups, perhaps WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, Instagram, lesser degree. I don't know what effect that might be having. I mean, Instagram is proving a remarkably good inspiration source, which is something I've considered before. Whether or not there's a critical mass behind those that's inspiring people to pick up armies and things, I wouldn't like to say. I kind of want to say yes, but I've got a feeling my I'm not sure how widespread that is.
I think it all helps. At the end of the day, if you never see 30k, you're never going to take it up. It's as simple as that. So the more you see of it, the more likelihood is that you're going to be interested in doing it, and the more variety as well. I think it's all very well seeing heavy metal or painters or golden demon painters winning stuff, but to a point, I'm like, that's cool, but I'm never going to paint like that. But when you see, average Joe painting well, sometimes that's what you need to, cool, I can do that, to help you get along. So there's got to be something for everyone. And each of those 3 different platforms offers something different as well, from your Facebook group that you can set up where you can be really immersive in your discussions and everything else, through the middle ground of Twitter to Instagram, where you're just looking at cool stuff and connecting a little bit, but it's it's less detailed most of the time. It doesn't have to be, but most of the time.
It was something. I was sort of thinking on that during our conversation. It was something I heard on this podcast. You were having a conversation. I think it was with Neil. I'm not 100% certain. Where it was said about the power of having painted army being played sort of visibly at a club and its ability to draw people in. I know it was Full Stride, actually. You were talking to Matt about it, and it was the power of that and the cinematic power of a game like that, and I found that with Heresy. I think that was really quite okay, I'm really going to try here, more so than I might elsewhere, to have a quality painted army in a way that where we can play a game that is very evocative of the types of stories that I know a lot of interested people are reading, but who may have have not picked up a model or a paintbrush in years, decades even.
Sure.
Then you think there's a significant power in that. Hence my attempt to have sort of 2 matched forces, even if it was only as small as a sort of a board game equivalent or a very small scale skirmish type equivalent, that you could put in front of people and say, hey, let's just run this little game. Let's have a couple of beers and play a game over that. That, I think, there's a power in that. So it doesn't even have to be as big as your social media groups, which can be, again, daunting. Yeah, it's got 30,000 members. It's got people pitching in about the right way to play a Legion or otherwise. I don't want to go do that.
I mean, it could be a little closed Facebook group between you and your 4 friends, just somewhere where you organise.
Yeah.
As well. There's lots of options in that. Okay, I think that was just really interesting to kind of get your kind of look into that. And yeah, I do think I wanted to talk a little bit about Road to Thramas anyway, because I think what they did with those articles was really good. We're going to be they've announced that we are going to be getting regular once a month articles, which is good moving forward. I suspect it will change day to be in line with the other ones they do for Necromunda and Aeronautica and whatever. Mine's gone blank. But I think that's a very positive sign. Hopefully we'll get more other articles as well. Obviously I did mine earlier in the year about the top 5 Lords of War choice, which I should have, I'll say it again, I should have warned people that it was just top 5. It wasn't top 5 best. It wasn't most destructive. It was just my top 5. But hopefully we'll get more articles like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more articles, the better. I agree completely that there's an excitement when you see an article like that pop up. And if you know it's coming regularly, I mean, your point about likes, which I hadn't realised that they actually show you how many they've got on the left-hand side of the article. And the recent Thramas, it wasn't one of the Road to Thramas articles, but the recent one about building your army, so starting out and what to build to start with, how to get started effectively. It's got about 86 likes on it. That's more than I just clicked a couple of random an Underworlds article, an Age of Sigmar article, and a 40k article. This has more likes than all 3 of those.
That's good.
Individually, Necromunda one had more likes, and about 140. So there's interest enough in these, and as you say, knowing that as I said before, knowing that there's a beat there through the official channel, I think that has a huge impact. I really do. I think people seeing it out there, it drives an interest. Just seeing the artwork, the imagery, stuff that we've all become familiar with, seeing it out there and knowing it exists, I think it provides a whole different platform for people to go and explore.
Yeah. Absolutely, definitely. And kind of moving slightly on from that, we had a Horus Heresy article in White Dwarf, and other people have covered this. I do want to talk about it a little bit because there's a few things that I haven't seen spoken about. And I had, I think, a couple of days after this on one of Discords for another podcast, I had a quite lengthy kind of chat back and forth about the nature of the article and what people's issues with it and all that. Essentially, so Simon Elson is a Golden Demon winning painter. He has a 40k army, which is painted as the Sons of Horus. In the photos, he has some Primaris Hellblasters and a character or 2 that are Primaris that were featured in the article. And he has some Age of Sigmar converted models that feature in the article as well. For his own thing, as I said, it's a 40k army that he plays with as Ultramarines, and he loves the books. It's set Great Crusade with Loken, just after Loken joined the Mournival, and that's his background on it as to why he does it. This got labelled as a Horus Heresy article, and people took umbrage with the fact that Primaris Marines are in an article where they aren't part of the game system and don't fit the setting. Shall we say it? They don't fit the setting, do they? They're not in the rulebook for Horus Heresy, and under the historical nature of the game, they're an anomaly. I have seen some people say Simon's a troll. I don't know about that. I do, because I think he's doing a Wordbearer's Primaris army, or a Wordbearer's army that's got modern figures in it now. So I think he's doing the similar thing because he plays 40k. He says there isn't a 30k scene near him, so he plays 40k. There was a lot of consternation about the fact that Games Workshop have published this, White Dwarf have published this as a Horus Heresy article. what are your thoughts about it? First off,
I find the idea that there's active distaste for that. I find that difficult personally. I look at this. I mean, the more you can read a lot into it, and you worry that you're reading too much into it. I mean, it's interesting that the Primaris models, let's be specific, the Primaris models are in the background of those photos. I wonder if the person taking those photos had a conscious choice about that, about pushing them to the back and saying, this is a secondary thing. Another way of looking at Primaris models, beyond what they are that they're true scale Marines. We didn't have an issue with that. Now, I fully take the point, though, that someone says, yeah, well, hold on, they're not just bigger Marines, true scale Marines. They are a distinctive mark of armour, a mark of armour that wasn't around at that time in this historic setting of the Horus Heresy. Absolutely. But how much do you pay attention? How much do you as a collector and a gamer or otherwise pay attention to that? That may not be important to you. Fantastic. Crack on. As long as you're setting out what your expectations are, and I mean, this is a conversation that's been had in all the game systems, is you're creating a social contract with the people you play games with, if you choose to play games at all. I don't think this takes away in any way from the. I mean, I'm looking at it now. I have the page open in front of me. I see on the page, one of the later pages in the article, a bunch of just staring Terminators and some tactical squads set behind them. Some Sons of Horus tactical squads set behind them. That is distinctively Sons of Horus Legion. The fact that it's got some other 40k scale models in it, or 40k true scale Space Marines, Primaris, Space Marines, whatever, in it as well, you may not like that aesthetic. That's fine. You don't have to put those in your army in any way, shape, or form. I don't think you could reasonably call this its vast majority of that is Heresy-specific models painted in a Heresy colour scheme. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have that as a Heresy article if you're going to badge it as something, which you clearly would, as a way of organising it. It's going to be most relevant to the interest someone, let alone, first of all, wants to know how they might go about painting their Sons of Horus army. There is a colour guide in here using basic paint scheme. Very good. That's going to be relevant to the interests of Heresy players. I think the way it's presented and the way you might play that, I can entirely understand if someone's playing a very historic game and wants to be completely immersed in that, you'd have that conversation with your opponent beforehand, surely. You would hope. And then say, okay, I want to play it in this way. The same way that some people wouldn't be thrilled if someone rocks up with an all-grey plastic army in an event where they want to show off the hobby, or they want to show it off and say, look, we really want to lose ourselves in this. I was hoping we could do it this way. You'd have that conversation beforehand. I think using the full range of Games Workshop's models to do your army, absolutely, crack on. You get to create incredible things. Seeing people convert, to me, the idea of cutting Mark III Marines off at the knee to extend the lower leg to make them taller is a huge amount of work. I respect that massively. It's not something I can commit to. I can't afford the time to do that. That makes them taller. Or you use the Primaris Space Marine.
So you're quite a laid-back, chilled guy, and
I cry.
and you're very accepting of those kind of things, and other people aren't. So a lot's come out about this article after the article has been released. So information that people reading it wouldn't know, and that's always causes problems, because it's like, well, actually, he was there for an event and he bought his 40k army, which he plays as Ultramarines, and they said, well, while you're over, we'll Photoshop them, we'll photo them. As far as I'm aware, this is the kind of information that's come out. The fact that it's labelled a Horus Heresy army by Games Workshop, I think, is it's not a problem, but I think it was a misstep. Lyle, I think's the editor. Is it Lyle, the editor?
He is. He took over
on Twitter. He came out and quoted the nature of 10,000 years, unreliable narrators, lost information, and Primaris could have been around in the Heresy. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. If you have a game system which doesn't have those models in there, and true scale, yeah, fine. But if they're around with a non-true scale, that's a bit of a jolt.
Agreed. It's an issue.
I think there were ways. I think there was a way round of putting this in the article. One, you could just take those Primaris models out. problem solved. I think you avoid an issue where a community that feels a little bit left out at times finally gets a really good article in White Dwarf, and there's 40k in there. Or you could have Heresy inspired, and both of those things do the job.
I would agree with that if it was, say, an all Primaris army painted. I mean, which you do see. I've seen. I mean, the number of full Primaris armies I've seen painted as, say, Alpha Legion, because it's a cool color scheme, and it's just presented in that way. But I agree. You could argue there's confusion by having a unit in there, but it's a unit armed with plasma guns, which he's presumably using as a tactical support squad.
He's not, because he's playing 40k. He doesn't play 30k, so he's using them as help classes.
Does it say that in the article?
I don't know whether it says it here, but he has definitely said he doesn't play 30k. There's no scene near him, so he uses them as Ultramarines in 40k. I'm trying to remember if it was in here or not. It was definitely said elsewhere. I'm fairly sure it was. But again, these, if it's not in here, I'm trying to remember, then that's not clear either, because that's, they've only got so many words to write, so that's fine, that's cool.
Can you take no, this is a shortcoming in my knowledge. Is it possible for Sons of Horus to take a Rhino with 2 assault cannons or rotor cannons on it?
Don't believe so.
No. So that is more problematic, that you've potentially got. And again, I'm seeing a Fire Raptor with what appears to have heavy bolters and melter guns on it.
Unless it's a Predator without sponsons.
It's actually, it is a Fire Raptor. Yeah, it's some of the issues. Yeah, I mean, marks of things is one thing. Things that are genuinely, because I know they've always been keen not to show too many things that are genuinely misleading to hobbyists. So I'm looking at those Rhinos. If you're running those as Razorbacks don't exist in the 30k environment. And as you say, if he's saying, I mean, I'm looking at that now as an overview. I'm looking at that first page spread, and you think that at first glance could be a 30k army. I could see what units would be what in a 30k army. The one that now stands out to me now, I look at it in a little bit more detail. I'm looking at it sort of live, thinking aloud here.
That's fine.
Seeing those Rhinos being potentially, they are Razorbacks, which you can't have.
So I just think if the article is couched slightly differently, the argument disappears. Right? So that's all I'm thinking, right, is what is the way to solve this? You either say it's Horus Heresy inspired, or you just take out the Primaris, and even then I think you could get away with the Rhinos, right? Someone will say, well, actually, but that whatever. Like, I almost feel that that's a very small point. I mean, what's interesting, if you really want to get into it, it's like, well, actually, Sons of Horus weren't wearing these colours when Loken was in with the other little bits and pieces of the timing. You could go as far as that if you wanted to be really pedantic. It doesn't fit, quotes, in quote, the law. It's ever so slightly wrong. Does that matter? Not really. So it's, he's done some amazing work on it and stuff like that. So I just think if they'd just taken those Primaris out and even left the characters in, like some of those Stormcast are a little bit tall to be in power armor. Like they would look a little bit funny to my eye. But I think you'd get away with that as well. I think if you just took those Primaris out, you would stop the issue. And unfortunately, there are parts. How do you say this? I almost said it the wrong way. Parts of the community feel like Forge World and Games Workshop are letting them down, and then this article then feels like a bit of a kick in the teeth for those people, and that's where they get vocal.
I struggle. I genuinely, I'm trying to see that side of it.
And that's because you're not coming at it from that angle, and I don't really come at it. I think it's a shame that they put the Primaris in.
I think it's quite interesting though to put oneself in the position of someone who puts himself someone who would find this problematic or would find this, as you say, sufficiently irritating to be vocal about it. And it's interesting to put yourself in that kind of role when you think, okay, say it's your core game, you are feeling like is being let down, or it's not as supported as perhaps it once was? And is this in some way a distraction from that, or perhaps a diluting of it? I don't see. I really am trying to see how a marine that has slightly different proportions to other types of marines, slightly different mark of armor.
I mean, I would say they stand out. I would say they stand out quite a bit.
Why?
Because they are a fair bit bigger and look very different, and the aesthetic is slightly different.
They are clearly bigger.
Yeah. And it just breaks people's immersion, I think, is a part of it. Although there are a small group of people you won't get in the mind of because they are on the extreme. So even if you tried, you wouldn't get that. And they want to see absolutely historically accurate for the future made-up history.
I get that.
Yeah. What my issue with those people is, do you build every single army you make direct from a black book or a novel? And do you only use it in those situations where they're in that black book or that novel? Because if you then play Thousand Suns, am I allowed to play you with Iron Hands? Because when did we fight if it's not historically accurate? So at some point, you're not playing historically accurate because you're not playing an actual event that occurred. So where's that line?
Yeah.
Everything.
I think that cuts to it. It's kind of the line I'm sort of the sort of theoretical line I'm trying to line up, really, or trying to explore, is by saying, what is wrong with that marine? I've almost got the same issue. You make the point that it's a minor one about having a Razorback there, if it is even indeed a Razorback. But you think, well, it's, to me, that's the same issue. If you've got an issue with one, you've got an issue with both. Yep. Is it a historical representation of an army? I mean, bearing in mind, we're putting aside completely the effort and the quality of etc.
That's not in doubt.
That's a completely separate
not
thing.
In doubt. Yeah.
Build your models, do whichever you like. Who gives the monkeys? But it's an interesting line about whether or not this in some way distracts or misleads
or
those
demeans
who are those who are exploring the heresy. Yeah. I personally don't think it does.
So I think there's an element of people are very quick. Some people are very quick to look at the worst case scenario, which is next heresy event I'm going to go to, people are going to turn up with Primaris Marines. I don't think any of this is going to happen. I sat down and I was on this group and they said, well, what are people reading this who never played Heresy? I'm like, cool, okay, right. Well, I've got a few issues, right? So first of all, if I'm running an event, I lay out in my event my rules for coming to that event. So appropriately painted, appropriate models and appropriately painted, and all units must be taken from official Forge World publications. So at some point, if you've got someone who's brand new to the heresy and they've seen this article and they're like, that's really cool, and they look at my thing and they go, I can't find these Primaris models in the rulebook. Like they're not going to bring them because they're not in the rulebook because they can't bring them. So you're not going to have that issue. If you turn up at your club and you're worried that someone's going to bring Primaris and you're going to have to play it, you don't have to play them. And if two people are playing with this, if this gentleman finds another person who's got Primaris in his army and they're happy to play Horus Heresy on their own table, just the two of them, then that's fine. And that's cool. And you might not think it's Horus Heresy, but that doesn't matter either. Yeah, and this was something I was like, your perception and value of the Horus Heresy doesn't have to be, like, the value of that doesn't have to be changed by someone else's value of that.
Yes, I was trying to think, does the article in any way diminish, by their inclusion, does it diminish or distract or mislead those who are otherwise enjoying the hobby? I personally don't enjoying the 30k aspect of the hobby. No. I don't see how it does. In the same way you'd say, well, someone couldn't use RTB01 Marines.
Yeah.
Those are perfectly valid Mark 6 armor Marines, but they're smaller than the Mark 4s and the Mark 3s that Games Workshop currently make available as Heresy specific armor, which we all use. So therefore I can't use those because they're small, because they're short Marines. Aren't you a little short for a Space Marine?
Yeah, indeed.
It's not. You can't. I can't use tall ones either, so they've got to be just the right height, have they? I'm simplifying massively there. I appreciate they're a completely different mark. I just wonder if it's a certain amount of this people inherently don't like the idea of more what Primaris as a law thing represents. And I wonder if that was more the instigator than it was the practicality.
So for some people, there's the fact that it's 40k. For some people, the fact that it's Primaris. Not just 40k, it's Primaris. But this isn't everyone. And I personally maintain the fact that they shouldn't have had Primaris in that article if they're going to write a Horus Heresy article. Because as a company, there is... the argument put across is if you're playing bolt action and they put in a modern aeroplane into the background of a World War II game, is that the same thing?
It's a good point.
It is a good point. It's a valid point. Yeah. And if you're the company that makes the game, then what you advertise as that game carries weight. So I think there is a responsibility on Games Workshop and White Dwarf to not put a Necromunda figure in a Blood Bowl game. Yeah, okay.
Right. It's this sort of slightly odd. It's almost like you're hearing someone, play a piece of music and it's just a note that's slightly out or a certain. But it just jars slightly.
Absolutely, and that's the level of it. It jars. I think they made a mistake. I think they got it wrong. I don't think it's the end of the world. So we went through all that. Yeah, if you come to my events, well, if they come to my event, they won't be allowed. Well, your event wouldn't allow it anyway because they'd read the rule pack and it would be in there and everything else. So
the interesting part of that was that statement of if you come to my event, it wouldn't be allowed. Okay, did you? Did you make that clear in your pack?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to do all of that.
Did you make it clear that this is the grounds for this? What are the grounds for in your army?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you could argue, counter argument to that, of course, is I shouldn't have to, but I don't know.
Yeah, you should always do it, even when you don't have to.
I agree.
I've had someone ask me if they could bring an army to my event, and I've said no before, and it's hard and it's horrible. But they had a Thousand Sons army, and they'd used monoliths as land raiders to go really into the Egyptian aesthetic.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, okay, tough decision, but it's just a bit too deviant from what we're trying to represent.
I think that's the key part, is what you just said, from what we are trying to represent.
Absolutely.
But the modeler in me, the painter, the person who enjoys seeing cool things wherever they are around, related to the hobby, makes me think, I'd love to see that. That sounds awesome. These like these floating.
You know what?
Some reference almost to the original epic Silver Towers floating around. Is like, that's a brilliant idea. I love it. But the key point is it's not the type of event that you were trying to run.
Absolutely. And if that person said to me, "Oh, I'm down your way. Can I play at your club? Do you want a game? I want to use this army." I'd be like, you know what? That's fine. I don't mind playing that way either, in the right place at the right time. Some people don't, and they can say no. And so you end up with this thing. And I put, so you've got different ways of playing the game, and none invalidate the other. My big thing was, okay, so people are worried that new players are going to see this, and that's going to be an issue. So what is the worst case scenario of someone reading that article, all right, and then wanting to get into the Horus Heresy? So let's look at what they might do. They'll go on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or wherever, Reddit, and they'll say, oh yeah, I want to do a Heresy army like that. I want to use Primaris. Now, depending on which of those you're posting on, you could get a whole, horrible replies back. But what you can say is, oh, cool. Yeah, it's a really cool army that dude had, but actually Primaris aren't in the rule system. And in general, most people like to try and be historically accurate, and Mark 10 wasn't really used, and blah, 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 blah. And you can explain it. And that's cool. And you don't have to be negative in that. And if someone comes to the club and goes, oh yeah, I've got this Heresy army, I want to use it, I've been painting it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Oh, you got Primaris in there. Okay, but it's your first Heresy game. No worries. Let's play the game. Normally, I'm not a fan of, like, I like to keep a little bit of the narrative involved, so I normally wouldn't want to do that. That's for me. Okay, cool. So you respond in the right way to someone coming in who's come off the back of that as a worst case scenario, and you still might have gained a Heresy player.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sort of directing them to that and sort of letting them know what the potential consequences.
Absolutely.
To me, it's the consequences
Yeah.
of a decision that you're making, where you might be making a decision unaware, or you're not even aware that you're making a decision that has consequences that you couldn't have possibly been aware of later on.
And in fact,
you look at this and you think, well, I mean, we've heard the designers talk about what their intent was behind when they were creating Primaris Marines. You know, it's a superior scale, and it's using, again, latest sort of design technologies to develop a Space Marine. You think plenty of people, objectively, particularly people who have no idea what the background is at all, could look at that and go, well, that's the coolest looking Space Marine I've seen. It makes more sense. It looks cooler. It's whatever. It's bigger and whatever else. I want to build my Heresy army, whatever that is, out of those bigger Space Marines. You've got no idea that means that's going to suddenly lock you out of a whole, or rather, there's a significant portion of your army is then going to be of a different scale, arguably different size to the rest of your army. And it equally could cause problems for you.
Yeah.
You have no idea about this, trying to get a game where other people who are in that setting, who have chosen to invest their time, money, skill, everything in developing an army of that, may say that's the type of game they want to play, makes it less appealing to them to play your army, which you had no idea you were building in that way.
Yeah, and
that feels like quite a niche case that I've just described.
Yeah, it is. But if someone spent X hundreds of pounds on buying a Primaris army, painting a Heresy, goes down the club, wants to play Heresy, and can't find a game, then that's not cool, and that should be addressed. And yeah, it's a very niche issue, but that article could lead people to think that they are going to get lots of games with Primaris in their army, and so that is just the little kind of nib that probably should be dealt with.
It's a valid conversation, I think, because you think. Hence why I'm trying to look at this from all angles, from my initial reaction of, well, what's the big deal, through to, I get it, I can see where you're kind of coming from. Because I mean, you think how much easier it is for me as a new player to walk up and be able to buy Primaris Marines.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even buy
which shop are you going to go into and pick up a physical shop? Are you going to go into and pick up a set of Mark IV off the shelf? I think they're direct only now.
Yeah, but even if they are on the shelf, you can buy Terminators, a Dreadnought, some dudes, and a character. The rest of it is all hidden behind the barred gates of Forge World. So there were lots of stuff thrown around, and Gatekeeper was thrown around. The term Gatekeeper, and I think there were valid kind of concerns, although maybe extrapolated, maybe expanded and blown up a little bit, but there was a kind of hold on, what are they trying to say here? And that's cool. If you don't want to play against certain armies and that's your reason for not liking it, that's fine. If you're turning around and saying you can't play Heresy, then that's a different thing, because again, if they find someone who wants to play it the way they want to play it, you kind of can. Now, I'm going to look at a table, and if it's all Primaris, I'm going to be like, it's probably not really. It's not really Heresy if it's just done that way. But again, if they're having fun playing Heresy rules, doing it that way, then my opinion for those two shouldn't really matter.
This sounds ruder than I mean it to. It functionally doesn't matter.
No.
You think that these people have no power over anyone else, other than perhaps event organisers. That's the only one they have. Other than opinion is just that. You think they've got no fundamental capability over it, but it's just about saying, well, are you going to have difficulty? You have to be able to have other people to play games with.
Yeah.
If those other people who are playing Heresy have understandably an issue with the wrong kind of era of thing. I mean, there's something now in my back of my mind while we're having this conversation. I'm suddenly thinking, well, the idea is that Primaris Marines were being developed either around pretty much after the Heresy. It'd be quite cool to have a Mechanicum army with like a couple of experimental suits.
That could be really cool, actually.
You're like, oh, that's certainly quite cool, but then you're like, no, hang on, well, that's a terrible route to run down. It's about people playing it. If they want to play it with that scale of Marine, fine, but they're going to struggle.
Yeah,
to perhaps play to extend their hobby.
Even so, there are a number of people who go to Games Workshop events who don't really know about the independent scene, and if that army turned up at a Heresy event at Games Workshop, would they let that army play?
That would be fun, wouldn't it? And then they whip out their White Dwarf, which shows that they've already shown. Yeah.
I don't think they would, and I think that's a benchmark, if you will. So yeah, I just think it all could have been avoided by taking those, however many, 7 models out or whatever it was. And that article would have been a really cool, positive thing for the hobby, and would have had a handful of pedantic people going, well, actually, I think you'll find that Loken was, they didn't paint their armour that way until this point. Cool, whatever. That's technically true, and who cares? At the end of the day, because most people won't. But I just think there was a touch of disappointment in a very simple fix.
Yes, and which I can see even from through this conversation. I can see where that comes from now, more clearly than I could when I saw the discussion evolving. I was trying to see when you say, had they been left out, had those models been left out, it could have been avoided. I was trying to work out what the it was, but I see where you're coming from now. And I think it's largely what comes about, and maybe it would have had the same impact, but because it's the official channel that is White Dwarf.
Yeah. And it carries weight. It carries weight. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think we've probably talked around that subject enough. So we'll call that there, and then I'll come back.
Interesting one. Yeah, good discussion.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me, Howard.
Thank you very much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself talking through things. I'm happy to talk on for hours, as you can probably tell.
Take it easy.
You too, buddy.
And thank you for making it to the end of another episode of The Imperial Truth. Hopefully you found this kind of rambling chat interesting. I wanted to cover those topics at the end there because I think there is a value in them. Maybe didn't quite get across that part of my feeling is we can still use and be aware of and be open to people who maybe getting through articles that aren't perfect in inverted commas to how we think they are, that it's our reaction to these things. Didn't really cover kind of how the community looked after those reactions, and looking at 40k players, Age of Sigmar players, a lot of other people who looked at the 30k community and thought, I'm not sure if I want to be part of that, because they saw a lot of the major negativity that was coming out. As with all communities online, that's usually not the majority of it. It doesn't tell the story that a lot of us know. And in fact, some of those people also act very differently in real life and things like that as well. But if we're out there and we're being positive and we're looking at it the right way, not everything's going to go the way you want it to go, but you can still use that. So, I think it was good. I was worried about if we talked for too long, we'd just go around in circles and that kind of thing. As I said, next episode we'll be looking at Book 9 in some way, shape or form. Yet to decide how I'm going to do that, because I haven't really sat down and grabbed the book yet and had a look through it. But we will jump into that, and Saturnine will follow up once we can get all three of us together to do that, because it's worth doing properly, I feel. If you've got any feedback, any questions, particularly about today's episode, then you can email Greg at theimperialtruth.com. We're on Twitter at imperial_truth, or you can tweet at Child of Fang. You can ask questions on the Facebook page, And I'm on Instagram as well. Don't use that a huge amount, but you can go to any of those to look at those. Every now and then I like to put a little shout out. If you listen to us via a podcatcher or you listen on iTunes or wherever it is, then reviews are warmly welcome, should we say. They help other people find the show or understand what the show may be about and whether they want to listen to it or not. And if you really like the show, we have the merch store, which is in the link in the show notes. And we also have Patreon as well. And that's links in the show notes as well. If you really feel strongly enough to go and do those, then wonderful. Thank you very much. Just want to say we did, we mentioned Borgia's line that he put up on Instagram and a few other places as well, but there's a few of them have started appearing now, seeing people doing one-day paint jobs, things like that. There's a handful of lines out there and they're all looking fantastic, but you can go and find various ones if you look at the right hashtags on the right Facebook groups. Lots of people doing some really cool stuff, lots of hobbying going on. It's a bit hard at the moment for some people. We've just had a Company of Legends being pushed back, which I was expecting to happen anyway, but there are a number of events that have been cancelled again as the UK is kind of taken a step backwards in terms of being able to go out and interact in groups and things like that. It's looking interesting. Who knows how long this is going to last? Fingers crossed for Adepticon next year. It seems such a long way off, and yet we've been in this situation for 6 months already. So hey ho, it's really really hard for organisers and stuff like that to make any decisions as well. It's a big thing to commit to without having any knowledge of what's going on. So treat your organisers well. Be understanding, and organisers as well. I think there needs to be an element of understanding there in terms of what you're planning and what's realistic to be expecting from the people you want to come. It's hard. I think it's hard now for me to look at any event this side of this year and put money towards them. So it's interesting times, as they say. But I hope you all keep safe out there, and thank you for listening. And I'll stop warbling, shall I? You have been listening to The Imperial Truth.